The 2025 draft is officially in the books. The Cincinnati Bengals have added 6 players to their roster for 2025. Welcome in, everybody. I'm Craig Sandlin, joined as always by Jacob Tissett. This is Chatterbox Bengals Draft Spectacular, recapping all 6 of the Bengals picks from the weekend. Jacob, how are we feeling?
It was a weekend full of surprises, I'll say. Basically, every turn, it felt like there was an obvious selection to be made, one that has been mocked into oblivion for the last 2 or 3 months. And at every turn, except for Jaylen Rivers, the Bengals deviated from that consensus pick and reached according to consensus boards. But I think the Bengals left this draft class with a lot of players who are going to be able to impact the 2025 version of this team.
Well, respectfully to the Bengals, they didn't have to do a whole lot in order to add players that would have a chance to compete in 2025 for playing time. So, yes, glad that they did. Glad that they drafted positions of need for sure. This is a Bengals team that in the past has not shied away from drafting in positions that were already strong. So glad to see them really address needs in this year's draft. Coaching staff probably feeling a little bit of pressure to make sure that this is the year that they reach their potential. Let's jump into it, Jacob. Speaking of potential, I'm not sure that there's another player on this Bengals draft board that has a opportunity to improve quite as much as Shemar Stewart. Now, this is a draft pick that I think surprised many, but the ceiling on Shemar Stewart, the edge out of Texas A&M, is certainly in line with being picked at number 17 overall.
Yeah, screw the Bengals draft board. That's probably the case for the overall draft board. Shemar Stewart, a freak athlete. We talked about it on Thursday night after the pick was made. A true disruptor, a 10 out of 10 RAS score, one of the most athletic players we've ever seen, the most athletic edge rusher we've ever seen. And the sacks weren't there, and that's been talked about a ton since the pick was made on the first round on Thursday night. Only 4.5 sacks through 3 years at Texas A&M. But what was the first thing Shemar Stewart said when he got to Cincinnati? He was quick to remind everyone that you can look at the stat sheet all you want, but he led that team in pressures last year, led the team in quarterback pressures, a Texas A&M defense that had a defensive line with 2 players picked in the top 50, 3 in the top 75. So a lot of talent on that Texas A&M defensive line drove that team to a near playoff appearance. And it was because of players like Shemar Stewart, who wreaked a lot of havoc on the offensive lines from his defensive line position. I know a lot of Bengals fans weren't super thrilled to hear that name on Thursday night, but it helped me feel a lot better seeing how upset a lot of other NFL teams were that the Bengals took Shemar Stewart off the board. The ceiling for him as a player on this defense is unbelievable. He can be an absolute superstar if he lives up to it, and it's going to be on Al Golden and this coaching staff to make sure he lives up to it. We are going to either be looking back at this in a couple years saying, how the heck did he get to 17? Or, quite frankly, he's going to be the 4.5 sack guy from Texas A&M, and it's going to be a bust out of the gates. So we'll see what happens. Certainly hope for the first option there, and he is an absolute superstar, has a lot of the stuff you can't teach. Hopefully they're able to teach him some of the stuff you can.
Absolutely. Shemar Stewart, obviously, pass rush this past season was a problem for the Bengals, but as was missed tackles,
that's right,
as was speed. So Shemar Stewart, a faster D lineman, will have an opportunity to compete right off the bat for reps without a doubt. Now, conversely, the next 2 picks for the Bengals, while Shemar Stewart may have the highest ceiling of them all, Demetric Knight and Dylan Fairchild, to me, have the highest floor of them all. These are 2 guys that are going to come into the Bengals locker room and immediately have an opportunity to compete for starting roles right off the bat. We'll start with Demetric Knight Jr., the 17th pick in round number 2, number 49 overall, out of South Carolina, goes to Cincinnati. Jacob, this is a older, mature linebacker, very consistent. What did you like about this pick?
I think you just touched on it right there. Now, the 25 years old certainly forces him down a lot of boards, but number 4 linebacker on CBS's board, number 2 linebacker on PFF's board, the number 1 linebacker going in today, still available according to ESPN. This is a player at a position of need the Bengals deemed that they had to address, and they went out and got their guy, and it's someone that they really, really liked at that linebacker position, and he's a player who's going to come in and make a difference right away. We talked about yesterday that his comparison, according to a lot of the testing, is Jermaine Pratt. He's a very similar player in terms of the prospect profile as Jermaine Pratt. If you can get Demetric Knight to come in and play at the level of 2 years ago, Jermaine Pratt, that's a pretty good pick in the second round for a team that's trying to win right now. A lot of the reservations against Shemar Stewart was that he's not going to be able to give you his best right now. It's going to take a couple of years for him to get there. Demetric Knight, the knock on him going into the draft is that he was his best right now at 25 years old after 6 years in college. So if that is the case, certainly not a problem for a team like the Cincinnati Bengals, whose window is wide open currently with their players, their star players in their prime. Drafting a plug-and-play player at a position of need, which we later found out is a really big position of need, double dipping at linebacker, certainly seems like they're going to move on from Jermaine Pratt, and they don't have the confidence in Oren Burks to be that linebacker too, which I'm very, very grateful for. If we were sitting here after the draft and Jermaine Pratt's on the way out and we didn't have a Demetric Knight, and I know we're going to get into it in a second here, but Barrett Carter as well, I think these are guys that are going to be really good pairs next to Logan Wilson. Demetric Knight, a freak athlete, and Dan Pitcher said that he thinks he's very versatile like Shemar Stewart. It's going to give them a lot of opportunities to move everyone around in this defense, play different roles, and I think that's something that really excites, a lot of the coaches on this Bengals coaching staff. Demetric Knight showed some flashes off the edge, and when asked about the lack of a pure pass rusher in the middle of this defense, as you can see there on the right, never drafted a true D tackle, talking about Shemar and Demetric Knight, Al Golden said that he'll look to use a lot of those defensive ends in the middle, named Cam Sample, Joseph Asai, when asked about Shemar Stewart and Myles Murphy, threw them in there as well. Add that they could kick inside and add some pass rush juice to that interior. But guys like Demetric Knight at that linebacker role, they wanted someone that can give them some juice off the edge, limit how much you have to sub when changing these packages. And it seems like Demetric Knight is going to be able to play some of that role, getting to the quarterback, as well as that traditional off-ball linebacker that he thrived at South Carolina.
Absolutely. Obviously, linebacker, a quiet need as we labeled it. Conversely, interior offensive lineman, potentially the loudest need for the Cincinnati Bengals heading into 2025, obviously to be debated with pass rush on the defensive side of the ball. But they address it early. They address it again later. But let's start with Dylan Fairchild, a name that, quite frankly, when the Bengals made the pick, wasn't overly familiar with him. Have certainly done some research and watched some film since then. This is a guy who started a lot of games at a pro-level offense in Georgia. Another guy that factors in to immediately step into a potential starting role in 2025.
That's right, and I think that's exactly what the Bengals were looking for with the guard. Are there some players that were on the board at pick 81 that might have higher ceilings on the offensive line than Dylan Fairchild? Potentially, but he's 6'5", 315, and one of the best pass blockers in this class, ready to go and keep Joe Burrow upright in week 1 of 2025, and that's what the Bengals were looking for. Immediately after the pick was made, I think a lot of fans had questions, just like Craig said, but Dan Pitcher said in the immediate press conference that Fairchild will have a chance to compete for that starting guard role, and that's certainly something that they hung their hat on. Players like Marcus Bowe and other more developmental projects that were on the board that Bengals fans had circled, maybe they didn't think would be ready for week 1 of 2025, and that's why they think Dylan Fairchild's a much better fit for a team like the Cincinnati Bengals, who thinks they can win right now. Fairchild, one of the best pass blocking guards in this class, is probably exclusively a guard. We talked about the other offensive lineman we took a little later today. He can play certainly tackle and guard Jaylen Rivers from Miami, but Fairchild, a really, really good guard from that Georgia system, one of the best pass blockers we've seen, and pairing him up with Amarius Mims again. Bengals fans really wanted a Georgia guard, Tate Ratledge, in this draft. They get one, not the one they want, but still a really, really good player.
Absolutely, and we mentioned it before, but the Bengals decide to double dip at 2 positions. First, we'll start with the linebacker position, one that was, again, somewhat of a quiet need, especially with the potential Jermaine Pratt drama brewing in Cincinnati. The Bengals go out and they add Barrett Carter, the linebacker from Clemson, a program that the Bengals are very familiar with, having drafted several players out of Death Valley over the last several years. Barrett Carter, a linebacker who's going to come in and, again, compete, might start on special teams, but depending on what happens with Jermaine Pratt and Demetric Knight, might have an opportunity to play alongside of Logan Wilson. Jacob Barrett Carter, maybe the lesser-known dual threat player in this draft, but we learned to find out dual threat nonetheless as well.
That's right. Lined up in the backfield on senior day, scored a rushing touchdown. Obviously, not what the Bengals drafted him for, but having a lot of fun there on senior day. There you see his quarterback, Cade Klubnik, happy for him. And I think this, though the Bengals didn't draft him to play running back, I think this is a pretty perfect encapsulation of why he is a Bengals pick in the draft. Immediately after taking Barrett Carter, what do Zach Taylor, Duke Tobin highlight? They highlight a 4.0 GPA. They highlight being a multiple-time team captain. They highlight being the green dot. Now that you have coaching, speaking to the captains in college football, being able to call those plays as a true Mike linebacker in that Clemson defense that is very advanced under Dabo Swinney in an NFL-like scheme, that's something the Bengals hang their hat on. They've been a team that's been proud to draft team captains for many, many years now. Barrett Carter mocked to the Bengals very consistently throughout this process as that mid-round linebacker to potentially grab to be the Jermaine Pratt replacement. A surprise to many that the Bengals double up at linebacker, but Barrett Carter, a very, very sound player. Now, does he struggle in coverage a little bit? Maybe. That's something he can certainly get better at in his game, but an 83 overall run defender and a very, very sure tackler is something the Bengals certainly needed to add after last season. How many times, Craig, late at night in post-game streams were we sitting here pulling our hair out because of missed tackles, especially from the linebacking group? Barrett Carter's not going to be a guy that makes us do that. He's going to be able to bring people down consistently, and that's something that is very, very important here in Cincinnati. I think he's going to be another guy, like we said with Demetric Knight, that's going to come in and play impactful snaps right away in year one. He's going to slide in and be a no-doubt difference maker in this defense. Maybe more rotational behind Knight and Logan Wilson, but we still don't know exactly where Al Golden's going with this defense, so might be seeing three of those linebackers out there more often than we think.
Yeah, all four of the first four Bengals picks in the 2025 draft definitely going to have an opportunity to compete for snaps and starts right away. Jaylen Rivers on the other side may not be competing for starts right away, but gives the Bengals much needed positional depth at the tackle position. We saw last year Cody Ford had to play significant snaps at tackle. I would think that Jaylen Rivers slides in now as your first off the bench as it pertains to tackle. Played both the tackle and guard position in college, though, Jacob, so it gives you that flexibility wherever you may need him.
Absolutely. Important to note, and we said it on the Day 3 recap yesterday, that Jaylen Rivers listed as a tackle by the Bengals on their draft card. Certainly, I think that they are planning on using him in that swing tackle role, as Craig just said, but our swing tackle last year was Cody Ford, and he started plenty of games at guard. So you see here in these highlights, a lot of highlights of Jaylen Rivers at guard as well, listed on CBS's big board as an interior offensive lineman, listed by PFF as a guard, listed by ESPN as a guard. So not just does he have that versatility, there's a legitimate question about where he will thrive best in the NFL. His length certainly leads you to believe that he can play tackle, one of the longest arms in this entire draft class at 6'5" and 325 pounds. He's an elite pass blocker, only giving up one sack in his time at Miami, playing both guard and tackle in that time in front of Cam Ward, and it really is a great player. This, I texted Craig right away, was that probably the happiest I was after an individual Bengals pick. It's a player that we mocked to the Bengals quite a bit, and after the first 3-4 rounds of really getting out of the consensus boards, the Bengals moved back to it with Barrett Carter and then Jaylen Rivers today, getting back towards more of that consensus board ranking and where these guys are thought to have been going. So Jaylen Rivers, probably my favorite pick of the draft until Shemar Stewart lives up to that unbelievable potential. But yeah, a plug-and-play player that certainly can play tackle if Orlando Brown or Amarius Mims experience any of those injury concerns that we certainly have to have with both of them. And I certainly think he'll compete for guard. If you thought Dylan Fairchild had a no-doubt competition slot in there for one of those guard roles, is Cordell Volson, Lucas Patrick, or Cody Ford that much better than Jaylen Rivers that you're not going to give him a shot to compete? I refuse to believe that. Now, will they earn it in camp? Maybe that's the case, but I certainly think both of these interior offensive linemen are going to have their shot to compete to start on this Bengals offensive line, which is a pretty crazy thing to say about a fifth-round pick swing player from Miami for a team that we think is going to try to win a Super Bowl this year. So that's where the Bengals are. This is what happens when you enter the draft with immense needs. If the Bengals had signed, a linebacker maybe a little bit better than Oren Burks in free agency, you don't have to double down in the draft. If the Bengals had attacked offensive guard, outside of Lucas Patrick, after sitting on their hands for about 90% of the time you could sign players. Maybe you don't have to sign or draft Dylan Fairchild and Jaylen Rivers at these slots. So I think a lot of these players are impactful players for the Bengals this season, but specifically those 4 picks in the middle there, those were forced by a poor free agency and a poor offseason that set you up to have to draft for need at certain spots of the draft where there's a lot of depth at other positions that could have maybe been better players.
Absolutely. One position that we knew the Bengals were interested in potentially adding to, despite reworking a contract with Zach Moss and going out and signing Samaje Perine, was running back. They addressed that need finally in the 6th round pick, 193 overall, is Taj Brooks, running back out of Texas Tech.
That's right. And Taj Brooks is someone I think we've all kind of shifted our focus many, many weeks, months ago, that the Bengals were probably going to draft a running back. And then questions were raised on Sunday or Monday night. I can't quite remember when Zach Moss's contract was restructured, right? They worked something out there that someone we had all labeled as a cut candidate for the Bengals worked out a contract to get something figured out to, we all think, give himself more security here in Cincinnati. That would be the rational explanation for what happened there. And then the Bengals not only signed Samaje Perine in free agency, but they draft Taj Brooks with their last pick in this draft this year. I think Taj Brooks is a great player, and I think he's a perfect complement to Chase Brown in this offense. He's incredibly productive at Texas Tech, the first rusher in school history to have back-to-back 1,500-yard seasons, average over 5 yards a carry both years that he was the featured back on the team. A very, very special player that has a production profile you rarely see. He has a rushing grade up above 85, an unbelievable player in terms of consistency and ability to stay on the field. Being a running back with as many carries as he had, playing double-digit games 3 years in a row, that's something that really matters, especially for a team like the Bengals. You're drafting a running back in the 6th round at pick 195. You don't have the luxury of them getting hurt in the middle of the season. Why do we only have 6 picks this year, Craig? It's because our running back we signed to pair with Chase Brown got hurt in the middle of the season. And I don't blame Zach Moss, obviously, for the injury, but we'd still be waiting here for a 7th-round pick if we didn't flip it for Khalil Herbert out of necessity. So to have a guy there in Taj Brooks to pair with Chase Brown and be a workhorse of someone that certainly won't be the lead back on this team, but you don't have to worry about how many carries you're giving him. He's going to be able to power through it. I think Taj Brooks is absolutely perfect for the Bengals in this backfield, but questions have to be asked about what they're going to do with Samaje Perine or Zach Moss at this point.
Yeah, I don't know what the answer is there. You know, they go out and they sign Zach Moss to that restructured contract. I don't know a whole lot of details about it just yet, but again, it was meant to give him, you know, some more security. And so doesn't necessarily make a ton of sense if you're going to go out and sign Samaje Perine, then you add Taj Brooks to the mix. But I don't think there's any question about it. Taj Brooks is your number 2 running back going into the season behind Chase Brown. So that is what it is, and how they choose to address the other 2 in that running back room, I guess, is to be seen. But Jacob, obviously we have the CBS sports kind of breakdown on the screen for a majority of this, and they give every pick of the Bengals a C or better. Now, having talked through it and had a chance to kind of digest all of the picks, give me an overall grade for the Cincinnati Bengals in their 2025 draft.
I put the Bengals at a B in this draft, and I think that it might be a little bit higher than a lot of people say, but I think I feel better about Shemar Stewart than most Bengals fans. I found a way over the last 48 hours or so to talk myself into that upside, talk myself into those near production plays that Zach Taylor was talking about. And he's a player who, if he can even scratch that ceiling, can be incredibly impactful for this Bengals team at a major position of need with a much higher ceiling than anyone else we've seen. I also think something that helps with being able to swallow that pick is seeing the other 2 players that Bengals fans wanted at that position, James Pierce and Mike Green, continue to fall after the Bengals. If they would have went 18-19, I would have had a much harder time, getting myself to believe in the Shemar Stewart pick. But the fact that those questions certainly permeated other front offices than just the Bengals makes me feel a lot more comfortable with Shemar Stewart. And moving into the next rounds, I really liked our day 3 picks. I know Barrett Carter might have a slight stain on it from Bengals fans because of Demetric Knight the night before, and no one expected two linebackers in this draft, but I think they're both going to be immediate difference makers. And I think last year, with how poor this defense played, a lot of people forget that they didn't have Logan Wilson. And I think having two elite linebackers in the middle of this defense can take a lot of pressure off a very young defensive front, because as you can see now, sitting here with all 6 picks made by the Cincinnati Bengals, they did not address the interior of that defensive line. So we'll see what happens with the Cincinnati Bengals in this draft class this year. But yeah, it is certainly interesting to see that they went this route. A swing for the fences with high ceiling in the first round, and then in the middle rounds, seemingly focused on that floor.
Yeah, it's a very interesting draft, obviously, for a couple of reasons. One is the Bengals had so many holes that they could address that they really had the flexibility to go kind of best player available with many of their picks. And I don't think that anybody would think at this point, having seen what they've seen, that they would say that the Bengals went best player available maybe at any pick.
Correct. I certainly wouldn't
we
say
obviously
that.
had, and there was obviously the need from the Bengals to address, as you mentioned, the interior defensive line, 0 D tackles drafted, the secondary, which we had said was a significant point of need. No safeties, no corners added this year as well. I think one of the things that
and not from lack of opportunity.
They definitely had opportunity, and I even texted you, and we talked about it before we went live yesterday about some of the players that are available prior to the Bengals making these picks that would have been fits. And ultimately, they chose to go a different direction, and it's tough because you've got, like we mentioned, probably 5, maybe even 6 guys who are going to see significant opportunities immediately. All 6 of these guys have a chance to play snaps in 2025, and yet none of them really blow you away, right? At least not today. Now, will they be contributors to this Bengals squad in 2025? You certainly hope so. But to then turn around and say, okay, well, they didn't add any stars. Nobody jumps off the screen as this guy's absolutely going to be a Pro Bowler next year or whatever. And that's one of the challenges you face when you have a first-round draft pick who is, quite frankly, a bit of a project. Athletically a freak, but from a strictly football move perspective has work to do. So definitely high-end potential, some high floors for a couple of guys, but ultimately tough to really see these guys turning into perennial Pro Bowlers, but they can still contribute right away, which makes it a really tough draft to grade. I'm more in the like C- range personally right now. It's tough because this draft has the chance to be like an F draft when we look at it in 5 years, or it has an absolute opportunity to be an A+ draft when we look at it in 5 years. But that's the joy of the draft, is that every year is exactly like that. It can be an A in 5 years, or it can be an F in 5 years. When you talk to the Kansas City Chiefs fans after 2017 and drafting Patrick Mahomes, many of them were upset with that draft pick too. So time will tell how this plays out. And certainly Jacob and I will be with you throughout the entire season to bring the breakdown as it happens. Certainly as camp gets rolling here in the next couple months, and then throughout the entire season. As you know, Jacob is live during every single game, giving immediate reaction, play-by-play, and breaking it all down for you. I join for the post-game. As always, you can find all of the chatter around Cincinnati sports on Chatterbox Sports' YouTube, x.com, Instagram, TikTok, and wherever you find your podcasts. For Jacob Tissett, I'm Craig Sandlin. This has been Chatterbox Bengals. Hoo day.
Hoo day.